have everyone present that we need to have?
Yes, Your Honor, I believe so.
All right, then we are ready for the jury.
Before they come in, did you actually sign up for what you were saying you were gonna sign up for?
I did.
Or give
I
you
did.
two dozen roses?
Oh, okay, yes. Team player.
You're gonna need them.
Eyes wide open, for sure.
Buy you a gasoline card too.
Oh, that would entail work being done on that venture.
Of course. Yeah. I don't know. Well, other one. It's. Yeah, the same. Yeah. Case I feel so big, it's not good on this. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's silence all phones. $1 million.
Probably one of these days we're gonna go past this case.
It's been a long time. We're ready.
All rise.
You may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the court has received your jury verdicts. All right. Ms. Dykes, please stand. The jury verdicts read as follows. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. For the second case, we, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of tampering with physical evidence as charged in the indictment. Both verdicts are signed by the presiding juror, and the name is also printed. You may be seated. Is the state ready to proceed in punishment?
No approach now.
You may.
And yes, Your Honor, the state's ready.
Before you call, well, oh, here's Mr. Sadler. Mr. Sadler, if you could hand jury back there, notes, books and things, if they wanna take notes on punishment.
I'm not sure. I'll let y'all-
All right. All right, call your first witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Luis Botello.
All right, sir, if you would please stop and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You may be seated. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Botello, can you state your name and spell your name for the court, please?
My name is Luis Botello Valadez, LuisBotelloValadez.
Your Honor, may I approach real quick?
You may.
And Luis, will you tell the jury your relation to Maricela?
Maricela was she was my older and my only sister that I grew up with in our apartment over in Seattle, Washington.
And how old are you, Luis?
I'm 20 years old.
And Maricela would have been 25 now?
25, 26, around that age.
You said you grew up with her in that apartment, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was she like as an older sister?
She was the sister that I've always the best sister I could have asked for, that my parents blessed me with, and sadly she's no longer with us anymore.
Growing up, you guys have lived in that same apartment for your whole life, is that right?
That's right.
And it's a fairly kind of small size apartment.
That's correct.
Your parents are very hardworking people, aren't they?
Without a doubt.
Your dad's had the same job for, what, 25 years?
25 years now, recently 25 years.
Okay. Tell the jury about your sister, what kind of, what she learned from your parents.
My sister definitely, she learned how to, my sister definitely adapted the dedication, the hardworking mentality that my parents always showed us growing up. She was always working. She was she would always stay involved in healthy activities, sports throughout her middle and high school career, high school years. She'd just always just be this just amazing, just great vibe you could be around.
Luis, I want you to tell the jury, there was a time that your sister, she got her first job when she was about 15, is that right?
That's correct, around that age.
And was she working at Wendy's with your mom?
That's correct.
And you were how old at that time? About 12?
12 years old and around that time. Yeah.
Okay. Is that about the time that most kids are starting to get cell phones and things like that?
Yeah, everyone in my class would always have their cell phones. I was like the only kid in my entire classroom that didn't have a cell phone.
Did you ask your parents for one?
Too many times.
To the point that they were done with that question, right?
Yeah, they made it very clear that they probably weren't gonna buy me a baby.
And tell me and that was because they really couldn't afford it at that time, is that right?
That's correct.
What did your sister do?
So I was coming home from, I forgot, I think I was playing some basketball with my friends right down the street. And I seen she was walking with a little Metro PCS bag. I thought she purchased a phone for herself. I didn't know what it was. And I went up to her and I asked her, well, what phone did you get? I forgot what she told me, to be exact. We both go upstairs into the apartment, and she pulls out this little Samsung phone. She told me, this is for you. She gifted me my first ever personal cell phone.
And that was from her first job when she was 16.
Yes, ma'am.
How does she look out for you now that you're old? So you are 20 years old now, is that correct?
That's correct.
And Maricela was taken from you when you were 17, is that right?
That's right.
What kind of influence did she have on you on your high school years?
So obviously at that time she already graduated high school. She always, before I started my freshman year, my sophomore year, she always told me, just stay focused in your classes, stay involved in activities after school, because that's what she did herself. She always wanted me, to just stay on top of my class so I could build that mentality, have a working mentality that would just help me with my future career. So I feel like that's what she just wanted me to have, a good working mindset overall.
And you're currently working, right?
That's correct.
And you're planning on going back to school,
I'm thinking I'm joining a trade school.
trade school?
Yes.
Tell the jury what it's like day to day now that you don't have Maricela.
Growing up with a person that basically that's the only person you can kind of relate to, because she's the only because that was the only person that was closest to my age. Obviously, I had my friends, but every day I had that person where I could just kind of talk to, just have those conversations you typically kind of don't have with your parents. Just kind of, it's a lot of things I could connect with her, since she was the closest to my age in that household.
And how's your mom handling and dealing with the loss of your sister?
The way I see my mother handle this tragedy that happened to us, it's the way I see my mom every day doing her best as being the loving mother that she's always been. She's always taking care of us, despite of us losing our sister, their firstborn child. The fact that all of this happened, herself and my dad, I don't even know how to explain myself. They find a way to keep pushing forward, to continue on with their lives, despite of this tragedy happening to us.
That's witness, Your Honor.
No questions, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. You may stand down. Please watch your step.
Any questions?
Nobody?
No, not yet.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury room, we're gonna send you back, jury, I think I called you ladies and gentlemen of the jury room, I was thinking of talking at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're gonna send you back to the jury room, we, need to find an interpreter. And we had not scheduled one, so there's a couple running around the building, we'll find one. But we'll be in recess until we do.
All rise.
Please remember your instructions. And our alternates can now be with y'all again. Adequate cause, as used herein, means cause that would commonly produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment, or terror in a person of ordinary temper, sufficient to render the mind incapable of cool reflection. Sudden passion means passion directly caused by and arising out of provocation by the individual killed, or another acting with the person killed, which passion arises at the time of the offense and is not solely the result of a former provocation. Preponderance of the evidence means the greater weight of the credible testimony. Now, if you find and believe by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, on or about the 5th day of October 2020 in Dallas County, Texas, caused the death of Maricela Boteo Valadez while the defendant was under the immediate influence of a sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, you will answer the issue on the verdict page, yes. If you find and believe from the evidence that the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, did cause the death of Maricela Boteo Valadez, but the defendant was not under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, or if you find the defendant has failed to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that she caused the death of Maricela Boteo Valadez while under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, then you will answer the issue on the verdict page, no. The jury's answer on the sudden passion issue submitted must be unanimous, either yes or no. In the event you answer the issue submitted yes, that the defendant did cause the death of Maricela Boteo Valadez while under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, then you will assess the defendant's punishment at confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for any term of not less than 2 years, nor more than 20 years. In addition, a fine may be imposed not to exceed $10,000. In the event that you answer, in the event you answer the issue submitted no, that the defendant did cause the death of Maricela Boteo Valadez, but was not under the influence of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, you will assess the defendant's punishment at confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for any term of not less than 5 years, nor more than 99 years or life. In addition, a fine may be imposed not to exceed $10,000. The range of punishment. I'm going to remove this paragraph before I give the jury the instruction, because that's superfluous on page 3. Alright, evidentiary instructions. You are instructed that in assessing the defendant's punishment, you may take into consideration all of the facts and evidence admitted before you in the full trial in this case, and the law submitted to you in this charge, and the charge heretofore given you by the court. Extraneous offenses or other bad acts. You are instructed that if there is any testimony before you in this case regarding the defendant having committed offenses or bad acts, other than the offense of which you have found the defendant guilty, you may not consider such evidence unless you find and believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed such offenses or bad acts, if any. The burden is upon the prosecution to prove such extraneous offenses or bad acts beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution's proof must exclude all reasonable doubt concerning the extraneous offense or bad act. Therefore, if you find and believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed an extraneous offense or bad act, then you may consider such evidence in assessing the defendant's punishment. If you do not so find, or if you have a reasonable doubt as to whether the defendant committed an extraneous offense or bad act, then you may not consider such evidence, if any, in assessing punishment. Fifth Amendment right. Our law provides that a defendant may testify in her own behalf if she elects to do so. This, however, is a right accorded a defendant, and in the event she elects not to testify, that fact cannot be taken as a circumstance against her. In this case, the defendant has elected not to testify in the punishment phase. and you are instructed that you cannot and must not refer or allude to that fact throughout your deliberations or take it into consideration for any purpose whatsoever as a circumstance against her. Instruction regarding parole. The length of time for which a defendant is in prison may be reduced by the award of parole. Under the law applicable in this case, if the defendant is sentenced to a term of imprisonment, the defendant will not become eligible for parole until the actual time served equals 1/2 of the sentence imposed, or 30 years, whichever is less. If the defendant is sentenced to a term of less than 4 years, the defendant must serve at least 2 years before the defendant is eligible for parole. Eligibility for parole does not guarantee that parole will be granted. It cannot accurately be predicted how parole law might be applied to this defendant if sentenced to a term of imprisonment, because the application of the law will depend on decisions made by parole authorities. You may consider the existence of the parole law. You are not to consider the manner in which the parole law may be applied to this particular defendant. Conclusory instructions. You are further instructed that your verdict must be unanimous and shall be arrived at by due deliberation and not by drawing lots or any method of chance, nor shall you add any combination of figures and divide the answer thereto. You are the exclusive judges of the facts proved, the credibility of the witnesses, and the weight to be given the testimony, but you are bound to receive the law from the court which is herein given you and be governed thereby. During your deliberations in this case, you must not consider, discuss, or relate any matters not in evidence before you, nor should you consider or mention any personal knowledge or information you may have about any fact or person connected in this case, which is not shown by the evidence. You are instructed that any statement of counsel made during the course of the trial or during argument not supported by the evidence, or statements of law made by counsel not in harmony with the law as stated to you in the court in these instructions, are to be wholly disregarded. You are instructed not to use any cellular device, smartphone, computer, or tablet during your deliberations. If you have a verdict, or if you wish to have a break, turn on the red light and the bailiff will quickly respond. And it will be signed by me, Nancy Mulder, Judge. At some point. Alright, the next one. Court's charge to the jury. Members of the jury. By your verdict, you have found Lisa Jo Dykes, the defendant, guilty of the offense of tampering with physical evidence as charged in the indictment. The court has received and accepted your verdict of guilty, and you will no longer concern yourselves with the innocence or guilt of the defendant, and shall now limit your deliberations under all the law and evidence in this case to the question of punishment, which is now your duty to assess. Just noticed the typo. The punishment for tampering with physical evidence is confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for a term of not more than 20 years nor less than 2 years. In addition, you may impose a fine not to exceed $10,000. You are further instructed that in determining the defendant's punishment, you may take into consideration all of the facts shown by the evidence submitted before you in the full trial of this case and the law submitted to you in this charge. The sentence that is assessed must be either served or probated, and the jury may not provide that a portion of a sentence be served and the balance probated. You are instructed that the court will determine the terms and conditions of community supervision, if any, and may, at any time during the period of community supervision, alter or modify those conditions. Fifth Amendment right. Our law provides that a defendant may testify in her own behalf if she elects to do so. This, however, is a right accorded a defendant, and in the event she elects not to testify, that fact cannot be taken as a circumstance against her. In this case, the defendant has elected not to testify in the punishment phase. and you are instructed that you cannot and must not refer or allude to that fact throughout your deliberations or take it into consideration for any purpose whatsoever as a circumstance against her. Community supervision. In this case, the defendant has filed an application in writing under oath stating that she has never before been convicted of a felony and has requested that the imposition of any sentence imposed be suspended and that she be placed on community supervision. Community supervision means the placement of a defendant by a court under a continuum of programs and sanctions with conditions imposed by the court for a specified period during which a sentence of imprisonment, fine, or imprisonment and fine is probated and the imposition of a sentence is suspended in whole or in part. Supervision officer means a person appointed or employed to supervise defendants placed on community supervision. Our law provides that if you find the defendant has never before been convicted of a felony in this case, in this or any other state, and you assess the defendant's punishment at confinement for a term of not more than 10 years, you may recommend that the defendant be granted community supervision. If you recommend in your verdict that the defendant be granted community supervision, then the law requires the court to place the defendant on community supervision. If the defendant is placed on community supervision, the court shall determine the conditions of community supervision and may, at any time during the period of supervision, alter or modify the conditions. The court may impose, but is not limited to, the following conditions. A. Commit no offense against the laws of this state or any other state or of the United States. B. Avoid injurious or vicious habits. C. Report to Community Supervision and Corrections Department as directed by the judge or the Community Supervision Officer and obey all rules and regulations of the Community Supervision and Corrections Department. D. Permit the Community Supervision Officer to visit her at her home or elsewhere. E. Work faithfully at suitable employment as far as possible. F. Remain within a specified place, to wit, Dallas County, Texas. G. Pay the fine, if one is assessed, and all court costs, whether a fine be assessed or not, in one or several sums, and make restitution or reparation in any sum that the court shall determine. H. Support her dependents, if any. I. Submit to testing for alcohol or controlled substances. J. Submit to electronic monitoring. K. Participate for a time specified by the court in any community-based program, including a community service work program. Whether you do or do not recommend community supervision for the defendant is a matter that rests within the sound discretion of the jury. However, if you do recommend community supervision, the court is required by law to follow the jury's recommendation. The parole law in this second jury charge is the same as in the first. The law regarding extraneous acts and the concluding instructions are also the same. And I did neglect to go over the verdict forms in the murder case. I will do that next. In the tampering with physical evidence case, the jury forms read as follows. We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of tampering with physical evidence as charged in the indictment, assess her punishment at confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for blank. There, your presiding juror will fill in a minimum 2 years and any number up to, including 20 years. And there is an option in addition thereto, assess a fine in the amount of anywhere from 0 but not to exceed $10,000. Or We, the jury, having found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of tampering with physical evidence as charged in the indictment, assess her punishment at confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for, and there is a blank for the presiding juror to put in a minimum 2, but no more than 10 years. And we, the jury, having assessed the punishment of the defendant at not more than 10 years confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and having further found she has never been convicted of a felony, we do recommend that the imposition of her sentence be suspended and she be placed on community supervision. In addition thereto, we assess a fine in the amount of blank, anywhere from $0 up to $10,000. And there is a spot, we further recommend that the fine be, here you would put paid, probated, or not applicable. And there are spaces for the presiding juror to sign his or her name. Now, going back to the punishment verdict in the murder case, I'm gonna go over the verdict forms with you. Verdict form on sudden passion. The first one reads, we, the jury, having heretofore found the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment, further find and believe by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, caused the death of Maricela Botello Valadez while the defendant was under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, and therefore unanimously answered the issue, yes. Or, we, the jury, having heretofore found the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment, do not find and believe by a preponderance of the evidence that the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, caused the death of Maricela Botello Valadez while the defendant was under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, and therefore unanimously answer the issue, no. The last verdict, is this the last one? No, we've got 2 more. Alright. Verdict form, finding sudden passion. We, the jury, having heretofore found the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment, but further find from a preponderance of the evidence that such offense occurred while the defendant was under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from adequate cause, assess her punishment at blank, no more than 20 years or less than 10 years. Confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and a fine of anywhere from $0 up to $10,000. Verdict form, finding no sudden passion. We, the jury, having heretofore found the defendant, Lisa Jo Dykes, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in the indictment, and not having found by a preponderance of the evidence that such offense occurred while defendant was under the immediate influence of sudden passion arising from adequate cause, assess her punishment at blank. Here you can put life or not more than 99 years or less than 5 years. Confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and a fine of blank anywhere from $0 to $10,000. Under each of these verdict forms is a place for the presiding juror to sign and print his or her name. I will make these corrections and we will have arguments of counsel. Will the state open?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen, jury, before we really go in, you hear a whole lot. You're gonna have these back there with you, these jury charges, right? It's a whole lot you just heard, and some of it I don't think we covered nearly as much in jury selection. But we talked a lot about the punishment, right? Having that tool bag, right? That's the way Texas law works. It provides jurors with a tool bag, and you've got a wide range. And the reason for that is we allow the jury to assess punishment, give you all the tools because you don't know anything, and that way you can go back there with every single tool available, right? The law allows things like sudden passion to come in whenever the defense requests it, and there's any evidence, whether it's credible or not, Okay? And we know it's not covered. Okay? So you'll be able to read back over that. I'm going to cover something on sudden passion, but I just really want to make sure that you understood the verdict forms. So when you get back to those verdict forms, when we're talking about the murder case, you have the sudden passion verdict forms first. Okay? You can, when you don't find sudden passion, you're going to skip right over that first part. And you're going to say, in that next part, there, right there, no to sudden passion. Okay? Once you do that, you come back to the very end, and that's where you're assessing punishment between 5 and 99 or life. I'll say on both of them, there's a $10,000 fine that's optional. There's no need to worry about that. It doesn't go to the victim's family, it doesn't go to anybody like that. So there's no need to concern yourself with any kind of fine. Okay? But you have that full tool there if you need it. When we're talking about the tampering charge, again, it gets a little confusing because, like we talked about in jury selection, tampering is 2 years in prison up to 20 years in prison, and that if someone's never been convicted of a felony, now you've got probation as an option as well. You're not gonna ever get to probation in this case. But it's there as a tool to consider. And so, you have them there on the first form, that's where you're gonna stop. That's where, if you're just assessing prison time, not probation, it's that first page. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about sudden passion. It got brought up just briefly in jury selection, and not something I touched on really at all, because it's not really a credible thing in this case. Right? The key component here in sudden passion is adequate cause. You've heard that read, right? It's cause that would commonly produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment, terror in a person of ordinary temper, right? You all, the ordinary person, sitting in this jury box, sufficient to render your mind incapable of cool reflection. So apply that to this case. Someone of ordinary temper, you all, in their shoes, right? That you're married in an open marriage, in an open relationship with a boy toy that lives in another bedroom that you know is constantly out with other women, and that you go from your bedroom all the way to a kitchen, and you get a knife, and you come in while they're asleep and not doing
Judge, I
anything.
would object, there's no evidence that she ever went to no kitchen.
Overruled, the jury will recall the testimony as they heard it.
Maybe she sleeps holding a knife. Where'd she get the knife? She goes and gets a knife and comes into two people asleep, climbs on top of one, and stabs her to death. Sudden passion is absolutely ridiculous and offensive. I think you all know that. We talked in jury selection. Why do we punish? I think I heard a lot of answers from this group. Not everyone. But I know you all wrote it down. I know you all thought about it. Think about it again. Why? We talked in jury selection, right? Should a sentencing verdict on punishment take the victim into consideration? Why? I know many of you said yes. Should. Now you understand why. That someone like Maricel Patella nowadays, 23-year-old young woman, can take a brief vacation to Dallas, go out to Deep Ellum, and never make it home. A completely innocent person who had so much life to give, who had goals, who was working, who had a family that loved her, who will never see her again, who didn't even get a proper burial of their daughter. Why? Because on Post Oak Road in Wilmer, just south of Dallas, someone catching feral cats finds her skull because this defendant threw her out like trash. She had to be laid on an autopsy table like this. That's why we take that into consideration. Because that's what she was capable of doing. That's what Lisa Dykes did. And then on top of all of that, hoping that no one ever finds her, knows that when she gets in trouble, right, rushes, she sees her wife arrested, in Miami, takes off to Orlando, and texts her son Kyle, same one she tells, don't show up because of that subpoena. This is my burner. I'm turning off the other so it doesn't ping. Text Charles, love her, right? I'm trying to get that money off of Nina. I need to get out of here. Someone who's cold and calculated to the point that she makes the bond and tampers with that ELM to the point that it doesn't even send a tamper notice, had created an LLC, applied for a lost passport, and makes it all the way across the world. What is that worth? To do all of those things, what is that worth here in Dallas County? Ladies and gentlemen, I know you'll go back there and do the right thing. No doubt of that. This family deserves justice. This county deserves justice. Lisa Dykes deserves justice. So go back there and render that justice.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. All right, Mr. Harris.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking time to serve as jurors. Without you, the system does not work. Won't quarrel with your verdict. I understand you've made your decision. And because you've made your decision, you're still obligated to follow the law. Now, your decision was obviously made based on the testimony of Charles Beltran. You found him credible. You found what he said about what happened to Maricela credible. That this was a vicious murder that happened over in Mesquite. But more importantly, what he told you and what the detective said he told them, she was jealous, she was obsessed. That's the evidence that you believe. That's the evidence that you found credible from the witness stand. That this was a crime of passion, which literally is sudden passion. Based on everything that you heard from Mr. Beltran, what did he tell you about her condition? Because you believe him. Now you have to apply the law to what he said, that this was a crime of rage. This was a crime of resentment. This was a crime of anger. That's what he told you. That's what led you to believe that she was a murderer. But the circumstance in which she caused that murder, again, because he's saying she's obsessed with him. And it's not just that once again, he has a girl in the house. She just spent all this money taking him and his friends to Arkansas for this show, paying for the band. She's had plastic surgery, facelifts. She's done all these things, according to him, because she's obsessed with him. She's jealous. That's what they're saying. This crime happened because she's jealous. That's what they've all said from the beginning. Now they want to run from it because the law says if there was an adequate cause, if they're based on resentment, anger, that's what he told you happened. That's what he told you. She was out of control to the state where he had to slam her up against the wall to shake her out of it. That's sudden passion. She's out of control. Anger, rage, resentment. How dare y'all be in here again? I just did all this for you. That's what he said. That's the evidence you found credible. That's sudden passion. That's sudden passion. The adequate cause is, again, everything that she did for him during that period of time. Everything that she was doing. The cars, the tattoos, all these things that she's doing, and you're still bringing women over here. So it wasn't just about the women, it was about everything that made her and all these other women that they drug in here obsessed with him. That's sudden passion. Told you, I never seen her act like that before. Never seen her act like that before. She doesn't have a history of violence. Never seen her act like that before. For some reason, she lost it that night. That's sudden passion. That's what you heard from the witness stand. Remember, after he slams her against the wall to shake her out of it, he says what? She was in a daze. She was in a daze. she's in a daze. What did I do? What have I done? That's sudden passion. That's our law. You can't disregard it just because they say you should disregard it. That's what they were going on. That was the whole theme of the case, that she did this old woman dealing with this young boy is now jealous because he continues to bring young women to her house where she's taking care of him. That's what this whole case was about. Now they want to run from it? Can't run from the law. She knows that now. You know that. It's right here. It's right here. And again, it's not about, well, we're in the punishment phase. It is about sympathy. It is about, punishment. But at the end of the day, you have to apply the law that you said was credible. You said that Charles Beltran was credible when he gave the version, the final version that he gave. When the detectives told you that he said she was jealous. He told you she was jealous. He went further to say, not just jealous, obsessed. Obsessed. Never seen her like that. Snap out of it. What did I do? That's sudden passion. And I'm going to ask, I'm not even going to address the tampering. I mean, you've said, because at the end of the day, you as a juror, which we told you on board you determine how much weight you give every evidence, you determine what's credible. Based on your verdict, you said that you believe that they tampered with the body. We haven't quarreled with that, ladies and gentlemen. All I'm asking you to do is continue to follow the law. And the law and the evidence in this case dictate that this was a crime of passion, that it was sudden passion, something that she wouldn't ordinarily have done in her 60 years. It's sudden passion, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to ask that you find her guilty, or you've already found her guilty, but we're going to ask that you punish her in accordance to the jealous rage, the anger, the resentment that she displayed on the night this happened, based on the testimony that you have rendered credible from Mrs. Beltran. And we thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Ms. Pittman,
Thank you, Your Honor.
you have 14 minutes.
Thank you, Judge. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there are some crimes that are committed. They're so cold and callous in the nature and the way that they were committed, and so sinister in the character and the human nature that was required to commit that crime, that it deserves a maximum punishment. A maximum punishment, and that, in this case, is life. I'm sure, there are hundreds of murders committed each year, and the way that Mr. Harris described the sudden passion law and tried to explain it to you is if you were angry and in a rage, you could kill someone and get lesser sentence. And that's just not the case. Read the actual sudden passion law, and it's very specific in its requirements. A cause that would commonly produce a degree of anger, rage, resentment, or terror in a person right there of ordinary temper. Of ordinary temper. Okay? Miss Dykes is not a person of ordinary temper. Miss Dykes found out in an open relationship that her wife slept with Mr. Beltran, already knowing that that had happened, and said, I'm going to make her my bitch. That's not a person of ordinary temper. Sufficient to render the mind incapable of cool reflection. As Mr. Brown pointed out, unless she is sleeping with a knife and always ready to commit murder, that's not what happened here. She was in her bedroom. I'm sure she heard Mr. Beltran, Chuck, Maricela come into the house, go into his room. I'm sure she heard the music, maybe some laughing, maybe some other things, and she waited that entire time until the noise was gone and there was no more music and she knew they were asleep, and she knew that was the time that she could go in there and make her point to Chuck that he belonged to her. That's not sudden passion. So just put that out of your mind. As I said to you before, some crimes themselves are of such a sinister and cold nature that they deserve a maximum sentence of life. And then when you take into account this family over here and the pain and suffering that they had to go through every day, hoping, praying on their knees to God, please let her come home. Luis misses his big sister that was there for him, the one person in that household that was his age that he could talk to, that he could bounce stuff off of, that taught him to achieve more, to strive harder, to graduate from school, to get yourself a degree or go to trade school, do something with yourself. She's gone because this woman right here wanted to be in control. Maricela never even met her. She never had a chance because she was asleep when she came in that room and stabbed her with that knife. That crime right there deserves a life. But that's not even it. You heard her testify in guilt innocence. Now, I didn't expect her to admit to anything. I knew that wasn't going to happen. But the callous nature with which she talked about Maricela, just like she was just anybody, just a nobody. Just a nobody. And the fact that she sat up there, she's been manipulating people for years now. Manipulating the system, running, using her knowledge of the legal system, not for good, not to help, but to save her own self. And to watch her sit up there and try to manipulate you all and everyone else in this room and every member of the community that's watching this just tells you what kind of person Lisa Dykes is. That's the kind of person there's no rehabilitation for. There's no need for rehabilitation for Miss Dykes. It's just not necessary. She had all the tools to do the right things in life and to lead a good life without murdering an innocent 23-year-old. Send her a message. Let her know. Let the citizens of Dallas County know, and that family, let them know with your verdict of life in prison what Maricela means and what her life means. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Pittman. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will retire to consider your punishment verdicts in each case. I've made those corrections and reprinting the tampering with physical evidence punishment charge. I see that some of you have your notes. As you know, you need to leave them in your chairs before you go back and begin your deliberations in punishment. It is up to you to decide how long you wish to deliberate this evening as a group. And then our two alternates will, of course, have to wait in Judge Bennett's jury room. All right. You will now retire to consider your punishment verdict.
All right.
You can go ahead and take them and I'll hand them to you back here.